The book of Acts and the book of Galatians, these two Christian books, one written by Paul himself and the other written by someone writing about the story of Paul. It's almost like the gospel of Paul, so to speak. That's what I consider it, because it's mainly about Paul. It's called the Acts of the Apostles, but the book of Acts is mainly painted around Paul. Now, I believe that the historical evidence matched with Paul's own writings can give a clear, truthful source to the real fact that there was an infighting between two groups, the actual movement of Yeshua and his followers in Jerusalem, and Paul, or Shaul, and his Gentile movement of non-Jews. Now, most Christians, if you took the pulse of many Christians or Messianics or any other groups that follow the New Testament, they will say it was seamless. It was Yeshua and his movement, and then Paul took the reins afterward. Everything was smooth. They believed the book of Acts, that Paul was grouped in with the group in Jerusalem. And if you read the book of Acts, it was seamless. Paul had his vision. He joined the followers in Jerusalem, and he was very tethered or connected, where he had to report to the disciples what he was teaching, and even brought in to question him about certain teachings or things they were hearing about him. He had to report to James or Jacob, the brother of Yeshua. Now, in this brief video, I'm going to show you why the book of Acts is very problematic. Why is it problematic? Because the book of Acts was not written by Paul. The book of Acts, according to most scholars of the highest honor in Christian scholarship, as well as Jewish scholarship, know that the book of Acts was not written by Paul himself, but about Paul. The same author that wrote the book of Luke also wrote the book of Acts, according to all highly esteemed Christian scholars. This is a truthful statement. You can look this up for yourself. Many believe that the same author of Luke also wrote the book of Acts. We don't know who wrote it, but the point is, the book of Acts is about Paul. Now, the book of Acts is dated by Christian scholars. Again, this is not the Jewish census. By Christian scholars, the book of Acts is a very late book, written about the year 100 to 120. Very late. Now, the book of Galatians, which we're going to speak about right now, the book of Galatians and the writings of Paul were in the 40s and 50s, way before the book of Acts. And they were written by Paul himself. At least 7 of them for sure, scholars understand, and don't dispute the fact that Paul absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, wrote 7 of the majority of the Pauline letters, without question. That being said, in the book of Acts, it paints a picture. He had his vision. He joined the movement of Yeshua, the followers. He was baptized, and he joined them, and he was very tethered to the group, very tethered. And he reported to them. If you read the book of Galatians, Paul himself, from chapter 1 through chapter 4, he tells the story about what actually happened from his own words. And in his own letters, especially in Galatians, he says exactly what happened. He states, for example, in chapter 1 and chapter 2, that he had his vision. Afterwards, he went to the deserts of Arabia, disappeared. We don't know what happened to him for 3 years after his vision. Now think about this. He claims to have been a persecutor of the church, of the movement in Jerusalem. He knew where they were. According to him, he was a persecutor over them, which is problematic in general, the whole claim that he makes of being a Pharisee of Pharisees and a persecutor of Christians. But that being said, he knew where they were. And you would think, after having a vision of Jesus, anybody with a normal brain would say, I need to meet up with this group and find out what Jesus taught, what he was teaching. What do they know? Right? I would. If anybody had a vision, you would go to the people who lived. Now, Paul never met Jesus. It's very important. Paul never met Yeshua or Jesus, ever. He admits this. He only speaks about having visions of Jesus giving him the reins, or giving him this entrusting to preach to the Gentiles. In his own letters he says, "No, I didn't go to Jerusalem." I wonder why he's boasting about this. He goes, "No, I did not go to Jerusalem." He says, "I went to the deserts of Arabia." He disappeared for 3 years. And after those 3 years, he says that he only went to Jerusalem for approximately 15 days, and he only met up with 2 of the followers of Yeshua. He met with Peter, and he met with James, as he declares, the brother of the Lord, Yeshua. He met up with them for approximately 15 days. Then he states that he disappeared again for 14, I repeat, 14 years disappeared out of Israel. Then claiming he came back to Israel and he confronted Peter to his face, or opposed him to his face. There was a problem. Let's get back to the point here. The fact of the matter is, Acts tells a very different story. He has his experience, he goes straight to Jerusalem, he joins the group, they work together, he's tethered to the group, he reports to them. Paul never, in any of his letters, ever declares that he had to report to the followers of Yeshua, that they questioned his teachings, where he was tethered with them and they were buddies. Acts was written to paint a bridge to fill the gap, the real gap, that there were 2 movements. There was Paul's Gentile movement, and there was Yeshua's legitimate movement, Yeshua's actual followers. And there was a battle between the 2. Very, very clear. And we're going to see from Paul's own words, as well as documented sources, that this was the case. So if you take the pulse of every Christian and Messianic who believes in the entire New Testament, this is what they would believe and know in their hearts, that it was seamless. Jesus to Paul till today. The first clue that we get that this is not the case is with Paul's own words. Paul would go from place to place, preaching what he repeatedly called my gospel. He called it my gospel. My gospel. He says in his own letter in Galatians that he did not get this from any human being. He said whatever he got was directly from the Spirit of Yeshua, from an angelic force, not from physically. He's trying to basically say, I did not get this from the disciples. I didn't get it from the followers. I got this directly from God. But what's very obvious here is that in a lot of his letters, most of his letters, he's always on the defensive a lot. He's constantly on the defensive, defending himself against another group, followers of Yeshua, or the Jesus movement. And this is very, very obvious. In almost every letter, especially Galatians, 2 Corinthians, chapter 11 and 12, you can look at it for yourself, both full chapters of 11 and 12, he's constantly fighting back against these other teachers of the Jesus movement, or Yeshua movement, because he's constantly pushing back, and he's constantly telling his students over and over, don't listen to those people. Over and over again. He also calls them teachers of another gospel. This is something you see many times. For example, in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, read the whole thing. Chapter 12, the whole thing. He's saying, teachers of another gospel. Don't listen to them. They're trying to confuse you. It's constantly coming up, confusing you over and over and over again. He's also very defensive, always trying to defend himself. And he protests constantly. It seems as if this other Yeshua movement, another group, who had another gospel as well. He also says, teachers of another gospel. He was protesting too much. And it's obvious that these other rival teachers were calling him out as a fraud and a liar. Why do I say this? Because he's constantly protesting so much. He's constantly saying, I'm not lying to you. I'm telling you the truth. I'm not lying to you. Constantly. Now, you don't find Isaiah or Ezekiel or any other prophet saying, listen, folks, I'm not lying to you. I'm telling you the truth. But Paul is constantly defending himself and saying, I'm not lying to you. I'm telling you the truth. I'm not lying. So what we see here is that it's very, very clear, just by his own letters, that it was not smooth sailing, that he did not get an easy ride. Now, who could these rival teachers be? Who could these other members of Yeshua movement with another gospel, who can they be? And why would they be calling him out as a liar? Why would they be challenging what he taught? And why are they so important for Paul to mention several times in such a defensive manner? Very defensive. He calls them rival teachers many times. And a few times mockingly as super apostles. He says, I do not think I am inferior to these super apostles. You find this in, look for yourself, 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and 2 Corinthians chapter 12. There are other passages. Those two chapters are very interesting. Constantly, I am not inferior to these super apostles. He says, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they ministers? Listen carefully. Ministers of Christ. So am I. He eventually says, I speak as a madman. I am more. The point of the matter is, what Christians and Messianics will do is they will say, no, he is not talking about the disciples. Again, you don't understand. What I say is this, enough. Cut the nonsense. If Paul was that important, where he was literally leading the movement of the Gentiles, and these people were nobodies, why even mention them? Maybe once in passing. Oh, by the way, there's these heretics, these nobodies. Don't listen to them. Moving on. We don't see that in his letters. We see him constantly saying, losing his mind, saying, why turn you? Why turn you to these weak and worthless things, the Torah? That you are binded, chained to orders, the Torah. These mutilators of the flesh. Oh, how quickly you are turned. Well, Satan himself disguises himself as an angel of light. So too, they are trying to trap you. Make you fall. Just like the serpent into Eve. He says that about these rival teachers as well. Over and over again. Mocking them. Pushing back. I am more. I have more room to boast. I have suffered more. I've taken beatings. I've been in jail. I've been shipwrecked from one place to the other. All this stuff, constantly. Paul is a very, very unlikable character. Who were these rival teachers? Who are calling him a liar and a fraud? Is there any connection in historical sources? Now, many of you watching will say, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's not the disciples. The problem is that we have historical sources in the ancient world of movements. For example, well, one movement in particular that were called the Nazarenes. Later on, they were dubbed the Ebionites. Now, this has a lot of controversy behind it, only among Messianics and Christians, and offshoots and off-branches who don't want to acknowledge that the Ebionites, who were labeled Ebionites by the church itself, was really the real movement behind Yeshua. Of course, their name changed to Ebionites. That wasn't the original name. It was the Nazarenes. What did they believe? If you look into their beliefs, it's very hard to find the actual factual truth. The fact of the matter is, they did not believe Yeshua was the Messiah. They did not believe he was divine. They did not believe in the virgin birth at all. They did not believe that he died for your sins. They did not believe in the resurrection. None of it. But most importantly, back to the point of this video, they despised Paul. They hated Paul. And they specifically, just like I mentioned earlier, in their own writings and in their own testimonies, and even according to the Catholic Church Fathers from the 1st to the 4th century, in their own words, they say, according to them, as well as their own writings, that they disliked Paul. They called Paul a heretic, a liar, and a traitor to the Torah itself. This is not hard to find. You can look this up for yourself. It's very easy to find. So we have 3 sources that show exactly what I'm talking about. We have Paul's letters. We have the historical documentation of the Ebionites and their beliefs. And we have the church fathers who wrote in their books. For example, one of the books was called Heresies, where they wrote about this Jerusalem-based movement. What did they believe? They believed that after Yeshua died, that Jacob, James, the brother of Jesus, led the movement for 30 years. Josephus speaks about this. Philo speaks about this. This is well documented. James was a leader of the movement, not Paul. They did not like Paul at all. They despised him. And Paul hated them. And there was a fight between 2 sides. Paul and the Gentile movement and Yeshua's movement. At the end of the day, Paul's movement won. Why is this? It's very simple. The Jewish movement expected you to be Jewish. You had to get circumcised. You had to follow the Torah. You had to live as Jews, worshiping one God, the God of the Hebrews. Paul, on the other hand, saw that this would have been a big problem in his movement if the first thing you had to do to join his movement was to get, well, you have to get circumcised. That wasn't a great attraction in the ancient world. Neither is it today. But back then, it would have been worse. Keeping the mitzvot, Paul says, no, you don't got to do any of that. All you got to do is believe in the Messiah who died for your sins and was resurrected. If you believe in the Messiah, you'll be saved. You'll be joined in. You will be part of the tree, joined in and gathered, Gentile and Jew. All you have to do is believe. This was much more attractive to Gentiles than joining the Jewish sects of Israel. So therefore, at the end of the day, Paul won overwhelmingly. And the Catholic Church was born through Paul's movement, eventually. So at the end of the day, Paul won the battle. Now, though there's many, many Christian movements who branched off from the Catholic Church, this is the real story behind the real problems between 2 sides. Paul's team won, and the Ebionites' history and their beliefs disappeared in history as well. Many Christians and Messianics branched off from the Catholic Church, but they're really Pauline movements embellished with Jewish tendencies and Jewish symbols, especially the Messianic movements. Very Pauline without even knowing. So I hope this video was encouraging and helpful. Look into this yourself. It's very good to get educated on these things. And shalom to you all.